for the rest of the semester. Shuttered bars and nightclubs, limited beach gatherings to no more than 10 people, and as mandated, restaurants can be no more than half full. The governor of Kansas says schools will be closed for the rest of the school year, while California says it will likely do the same. Amazon, meanwhile, says it will stop accepting some items in its warehouses and will focus only on necessities, meaning fewer electronics and more home goods. Let's bring in the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg. The Atlantic has been doing some great reporting on the pandemic. Jeffrey, good to have you on this morning.
Thank you.
We're at a point where this is in all 50 states. One of the biggest stories is testing, and you hear a bit of a shift among some experts or members of the administration, less focus on testing and now focus more on mobilization. But we're still confused as to whether or not testing is ever going to get to the point where it is across the board so we know exactly where we stand. What is the Atlantic looking at?
Well, the Atlantic is looking at, we've been looking at from the very, very beginning, these testing questions. We were among the first to sort of ask the question, why is no one being tested? The interesting question, and I don't know if there's a definitive answer to this, there's dispute, obviously, even inside the government about this, is testing is useful now, but the virus is here. And so this mobilization that people talk about, the flattening the curve by social isolation, by quarantining, by shelter in place, has become the more salient or more desperate topic. But on the other hand, if you listen to the scientists, and we should be listening to the scientists, they say testing is the only way to understand where pockets where pockets of the disease are breaking out, are growing rapidly, and that would allow governments to target specific regions, specific cities, and isolate them. I mean, that's what we've come to. So, but again, the testing is just part of a laggard, slow government, federal government response. I shouldn't say government because state, local governments have been doing much more than the federal government until this week.
Yeah. So, Jeffrey, what I don't understand is why. First of all, I'll never understand why we said no to the World Health Organization test. I don't understand why states still couldn't, why the federal government still couldn't reach out and get some of those tests for our worst affected areas. You look at what's happening on the West Coast, what happened in Seattle, San Francisco, what's happening now in New York City. It's not like there was a buy date on those World Health Organization tests. And it appears our government keeps fumbling around on these tests. I heard somebody last night suggest, oh, well, we're past the stage of testing. No, we're not past the stage of testing. There are 275 million Americans who don't know whether they have the coronavirus or not. There are entire communities that need to be mapped out. We need to know where the virus is and where it is not. So I don't understand, and maybe you have a better answer for us. Why haven't we gotten the World Health Organization kits? Why don't we still get them if we can't get them, if our government can't produce and help us do basic mapping of how to bend that curve?
I can't answer that question about the Trump administration and its responses to this. I mean, we've talked on this show for a month now about a slow response, a stutter step response. You know, one thought I've had about this, and I think this tracks with previous behavior by this administration. There is a kind of recalcitrance to engage with international organizations, with the idea of cross-border cooperation, and the idea that that we would have to rely on a World Health Organization, a UN-type organization. To do this is anathema to some people, sort of almost emotionally. But the other point is very simple. Until this week, this was not taken extremely seriously, as we know, by the president. Now he said, I guess just yesterday, that he always knew it was a pandemic. He didn't know it was a pandemic. As my colleague Jim Fallows points out in The Atlantic, I mean, there's a long record going back a month and a half of him downplaying, mocking, diverting, rather than actually grappling with this. So, you know, when the histories stories of this period are written, we're going to find out the decision points all along the way where people in the government said, you know what, we're not going to respond to what the World Health Organization is telling us. We're not going to respond to this. We're not going to respond to that. But, this is we are at the Atlantic. We're trying to do this live history, but it's fast shifting.
It is fast shifting. Let's bring in right now NBC News' Kelly O'Donnell. Yeah. She was at the press conference yesterday in the White House. Kelly, we're asking, of course, questions about these tests. They continued. The White House tried to answer some of the questions about the tests, but bottom line, why didn't we get the World Health Organization test? I understand that they said, oh, they don't reach our standards. Well, they certainly reached the South Korean standards and helped them bend that curve. Why can't we get some of those to supplement our lack of testing? Why can't individual states do the same thing?
Well, part of what we're all learning, Joe, are some of the bureaucratic steps that are involved in this. We have asked at a couple of these briefings about the World Health Organization test, and the most fulsome answer we've had so far came yesterday. The president stepped aside from the lectern, and he let Admiral Giroux and Dr. Birx, two of the experts on the front line of this, Admiral Giroux in charge of testing now, and their answer to this is that the World Health Organization provided an early stage test that had not met FDA approval for quality, and it was different methodology, and they said flat out there wasn't a ready test offered to the United States that was turned down. Now, we have to do more work on this to find out some of the distinctions there, and they are saying that there was never a time that they were given something that was ready for use in the field that they turned down. So we'll have to continue to ask those questions and point that out. And when you talk about
Kelly, that's fascinating, because obviously it was good enough for South Korea. It was good enough for these other countries, Singapore, who tested.
It was ready for them.
And actually,
well,
helped
as you
bend
know,
the
the United States does not. The United States on pharmaceuticals and on testing does not allow for what other nations do, just as a matter of course. I mean, you know that from your time in office, the whole issue of different pricing for over-the-counter drugs as well as prescription drugs. So that's their answer. Now, I can only tell you what they told us.
No, I understand that.
Yes. I'm certainly not a scientist.
I understand it. I understand. It's just bizarre that they would think that in the middle of a pandemic. And of course, that's not for you to answer. I understand that completely. We'll discuss that around the table. Let me ask the next question then. When is every American that needs to get tested, when are they going to be able to get tested? Because we were promised that several weeks ago. It hasn't happened. When does the White House say every American that wants to be tested can be tested?
And we don't have a clear answer on that, and we've been asking that day to day.
And what's their excuse for not being able to answer that basic question?
And again, what they're telling us is that the different levels of approval that are releasing these tests have happened as recently as Friday, so today's Wednesday, and that the private laboratories that have now been given the go-ahead are doing their testing. There is testing that they say exists that was before this new wave, and about 2 million tests, they say, will be made available, with the caveat, of course, that they're saying not every American who wishes a test for screening purposes could have one. It's about symptoms and a doctor saying that you need the test. One of the other lags is this notion of a website to help funnel people who can answer questions about what their symptoms are and can be directed to locations that will have drive-through testing. We don't have that yet. Testing, Joe, is certainly one of the prime questions we're asking each day because it is of such high concern, and it does help to shape where we understand the illness is in order to try to also get compliance from Americans on whether it is a stay-at-home policy, a limit your contact, a don't go to restaurants, all the things we've been hearing. And one of the questions has been, can we trust the information we're getting? Some of that is, are they being truthful? Some of it is the bureaucracy that in any crisis has its hiccups. And in some cases, we're talking about new partnerships, new technology, new tests and tools. at a time of shortages, where you have the vice president asking construction firms to donate masks, and you have different manufacturers saying we're ready to plus up on production if we get a specific order. So there's a lot of struggle for those of us who are trying to hold the administration to account, as well as to give them a venue to talk about what message they have to the American people. And this is difficult stuff to weed through each day.